Today we are going to talk about racial profiling as one of the social problems in the United States. So we'll be touching on definition, the causes and contributing factors, the sociological theoretical perspective, particularly the conflict theory, examples and evidence, the effects and consequences, possible solutions, then we'll conclude. Racial profiling by law enforcement is the use of a person's race or ethnicity as a standard for suspicion of involvement in some form of criminal activity or threat by those. In other words, racial profiling is judging or targeting people mainly because of race or ethnicity. It is based on assumptions and not behavior or evidence of what someone has done. So in summary, racial profiling is a type of systemic racism that involves the singling out of racial minorities for differential treatment, usually harsher and unfair treatment. Some of the contributing factors of racial profiling is historical background, where you can talk about chattel slavery, where Africans were being enslaved and sold out to the dominant and the upper class. So they serve as laborers for those people, and after those people still see them as inferior, and that causes racial profiling. Segregation and Jim Crow. So Jim Crow is a system of law where the blacks and the white people were being separated in terms of health facilities, educational facilities, and their residents. And this also leads to racial profiling. Media influence. The allied group control the media and use media as a forum where they tarnishes the image of the minority group and the blacks. They relate their image to dangerous things, crimes, and threats that makes them look as one. And this leads to racial profiling. Criminalization of poverty. So poor communities that are being dominated by blacks are often seen as dangerous, and there are a lot of police being located around this area for hypervigilance, and this makes the police take advantage of them, and this also leads to racial profiling. Talk about the sociological theories of racial profiling. Particularly the conflict theory. So the conflict theory is a sociological framework that views society as a competition for limited resources driven by power inequalities. So the conflict theories will define racial profiling as a mechanism of social control used to preserve power and privilege for dominant groups at the expense of marginalized communities. Racial profiling reinforces social power and inequality. In other words, the dominant class use social profiling as a mechanism of social control. The symbolic interactionists will also um, talk about labeling theory when it comes to racial profiling, where symbols and give meaning to daily interactions. So people seen as deviants or likely to commit crimes behave as such. So profiling happens because people as such stereotypical meanings to race. Blacks and Asians are often labeled as criminals, and hence police treat them based on the labels and not their actions. Racial labels influence treatment and suspicion. Okay, now so let's talk about some of the graphical representation of racial profiling. So this was a research done in California to compare the population of a particular race to the number of stops, the number of police stops as California. We will see that for the Latino, the number of population compared to the number of stops were higher. Though there is a higher population, less people were being stopped by the police. To for law enforcement, and same thing is seen for the whites. The population is higher than the number of people that were being stopped. And when we come to Asians, the population is also higher than the number of people that were being stopped. But when we come to the blacks, it's like the number of stops for law enforcement is twice as the population. That means like even one person is being stopped more than twice or thrice for like law enforcement or something. When we look at the other groups, most of the time the population is higher than the number of stops. So this serves as an evidence of racial profiling, particularly the blacks. Also, During Legiby's research, he found out that um, most common stops of violence, crime, and weapon offenses, blacks and Hispanic are more likely to be stopped as twice as white people. Black Californians are more than as twice likely to be searched as white Californians. About 20% versus 8% of all stops. Searches of black civilians are some likely to yield contraband and evidence, while others will not. So black people are overrepresented in stop not leading to enforcement as well as stops leading to enforcement. And black individuals are also almost twice as likely to be booked into jail as white people. Okay, this was also another research pertaining to racial profiling where the number of citations given to a particular race was being taken into note. And we could see that most instances, most traffic violation, the blacks people received a higher number of citation as compared to the other race or group. Now let's talk about some of the examples of racial profiling. Traffic stops and roadside policing are major instances where racial profiling occurs, and it even sometimes leads to death of some of these victims. And this is seen in the death of Black victims of police brutality, such as Eric Garner, who, when he had an encounter with the police, they accused him of selling cigarettes without stamps, and he was trying to explain to them that it was not true, and they beat him up to the George Floyd was also have some interactions with the police, and they ended up killing him as seen in the video. And this is also Sandra Bond, who also had some kind of issues with the police officer for traffic violation. They ended up jailing her, and she died in their custody. Um, Rice, who was a 12-year-old boy who was just playing with a gun, and just because he was a black, people assume it was a real gun and it is a threat and call police on him, and he was shot to death. More examples. Racial profiling is also seen in shops where Oprah Winfrey wanted to buy a bag, but she was denied access to buying that bag because they thought she's a black and she doesn't have the amount of money it takes to buy that bag. Kayla Phillips also had a similar incident where Bunny called police on her because she bought a designer bag that was very, very expensive. And they were like, she is a black and she doesn't have that kind of money or that amount of money to buy that particular bag. So she is a thief, she stole the money, and they called the police on her. Racial profiling of Black children. Black children also face racial profiling. Black children are often perceived as older or threatening compared to white children. Black kids playing with floaties, pool noodles, and inner tubes are seen as threat and suspicious. Kids suspicious, while white kids doing the same thing are considered innocent. Also, because Asians are also a particular group of people that face some kind of racial profiling, and this is evidenced in COVID-19. Because COVID-19 was first recorded in China, people see Asians as a carrier of this virus, so they face a lot of hate crimes. Yeah. Racial profiling is also seen in maternity guidelines. Serena Williams almost died after childbirth when her concerns were dismissed because she was a black, and the health professionals saw her bleeding as normal and didn't address her concerns. Black women are also likely to have labor-induced and their concerns dismissed because they are assumed to be stronger. Some other minority groups or some particular religion, particularly the Muslim, are also being searched critically because they are assumed to possess weapon where they could use in killing people when it comes to public or socialization places, and they are sometimes singled out during their flight. Yeah. Effects of racial profiling. So from the conflict theorist perspective, we define racial profiling as a mechanism or a tool where the dominant or the allies people in the society use to maintain power and create inequality in the society. So and this leads to chaos in the society. So one of the effects is it creates conflict and tension between communities and institutions. It also leads to emotional distress, fear, and trauma, where people who faces racial profiling are likely to be scared of taking some particular decisions or interacting with some particular people or even engaging in certain activities. So their mental health is likely to be at stake and they wouldn't be want to be victims of racial profiling again. There's also loss of trust in law enforcement in the sense that white people or other dominant group um, or the upper class in the society commit same crimes and they are not being punished, they are not being arrested or even jailed. But when blacks or other minority groups commit same crimes, they are being arrested or jailed. So they don't trust the law because they think the law is not applied to everyone equally. There's feelings of limitation or reduced citizenship. Well, because there is no equal opportunity for everyone, or there's no equal right. So it's not everything that the blacks have the opportunity or that accessibility to. So this limits their right and reduce their citizenship right. Community-wide stress and hypervigilance. So places that are dominated by blacks or other minority group are seen as poor communities and they are being seen as deviant and there's a whole lot of crime going on. So there are a lot of police offices or stations located in these areas and to ensure hypervigilance. Yeah. Solutions of racial profiling. From the conflict theory perspective, we define racial profiling as a mechanism that the dominant group, I mean the upper class, use as a tool to control power in the society. So in order for racial profiling to be reduced, this power inequality has to be worked on. So structural policy reform have to reduce the power imbalance between the state authorities and the marginalized group, redistribution of power, shifting power away from allied control institutions to establish power. Because it is the allied that control power, they do everything in favor of themselves. So when power is being shifted away from them, I believe this will create power balance in the society. Limit institutional forces to control racialized group, especially the police. There should be like laws regulating how the police interact with everyone, and those who go contrary to these laws must be punished or must be punished. Challenging economic and racial inequality. Most of the time, Black people are also seen as deviant or likely to commit crimes because they think they are poor and will do everything to survive. When there is economic stability or economic equity and they have access to wealth and wealth, I believe this will also help to reduce racial profiling. Political mobilization and collective resistance through organizations such as Black Lives Matter, racial and identity profiling acts. So organizations that will arise as a response to racial profiling should be given the necessary support and resources to achieve their aim in reducing racial profiling. So in conclusion, racial profiling disproportionately affects Black, Muslim, Asians, and other minority communities. It leads to emotional harm, loss of trust, and sometimes fatal encounters, reinforced by institutional practices, policies, and societal biases, and maintain power structures. The conflict theory explains how profiling reproduces inequality and social conflict. Organizations and advocacy groups work to support victims of racial profiling and push for reform. Solutions require structural change, community power, and accountability in law enforcement. Racial profiling remains a major social problem in the US and must be addressed to ensure safety, equity, and justice for all.